Yeah, we're in. Martin's coming in. Martin, you're in. Can you hear us? Martin, can you hear
us? Tell him close the door after himself.
Martin, can you hear us? Okay, I'll ring him again and tell him what to do. Just 1 second, Bernie.
Yeah, go on, you fire away.
Martin. No, he's on his phone, I think.
No worries.
Hello, Martin. Yeah. Okay. Down at the bottom of your screen, if you go down to the bottom of that screen, you'll see. You look at mute. Go into your. There's a little thing, a symbol for your microphone, and it might say mute and then unmute. Yeah. At the bottom of your screen, you know what the screens that we're on, the three of us is on. Yeah. Okay, unmute. Yeah. Are you there, Bernie? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're live here now in 1 second. We could be live as it is.
Well, tell us when we're live.
Yeah, we're live now, Thomas.
Okay. Well, Martin doesn't know that. Let's see.
Oh, don't worry. We'll the minute he comes in.
Okay.
I just want to share this now to a couple of groups.
Martin, can you hear us?
Yeah, that's better. Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay.
Grand.
Now we can't see you, Martin.
Well, you're not missing much.
And you're also live, Martin.
I know, but the audience need to see you.
I don't want to see me.
I think we might be live, Martin.
We are.
Oh, I don't care.
I think I'll turn the screen off as well.
Okay, we're going to start with that. Jesus, let me give a second to get my phone.
Try and get the video on there, Martin, will you?
What's that?
Looking well, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Can you see Martin, Bernie?
No, thank God.
No, I can't see you two either. Anyway.
Okay. Well, try and get it on there, Martin, because click on the video.
I'm afraid to touch it down in case I lose everything.
No,
just
put
it on first, Martin, and then put on the phone.
No.
What's that, Bernie?
Put your clothes on first, and then switch on the phone.
I'll take them off and I'll go on. Yeah.
Martin, just go into there's a video symbol on the screen, at the bottom of the screen, yeah? You see little camera symbol, yeah?
Thomas, I'm afraid to touch anything. There's no symbols here on my phone, and
we can use the audio. We can use
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, I'm just terrified I'm going to lose everything.
Yeah, no, okay, Martin.
Sorry about that now.
Don't worry.
How are you getting on anyway?
Grand, not a bother, Thomas, not a bother. Actually, believe it or not, I'm still in self-isolation until tomorrow.
Why, did you get tested or something?
No, I was away, Thomas, in Croatia, and I was on 6 airports and 4 airplanes, all within 5 days, and I was in very confined spaces and exposed to a lot of people.
Okay.
So as a precaution, I was advised to self-isolate for 14 days, and that now is up tomorrow.
Right, okay. So you've been in isolation for 14 days?
Well, I just left for the bare essentials to go to the shop and get a bit of grub, but that's it, back here, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Just remind both of you again that we're still live. Okay.
Grand.
And it might be a bit difficult to get the comments in, but hopefully we will. So I'll keep an eye on my phone every so often.
Right.
This is part of the TravVision platform where we're hoping to open up, and we are opening up to discussions around particular issues, various issues, but also very important issues, such as what we're having here at the moment with the coronavirus. So we've decided we'll come together, put our political and various other differences to one side, focus on the well-being of the community. So with that, I welcome on Thomas McCann, who's a councillor with the National traveller counselling services, and he's got a website. He can tell you all about that in a moment. We've also got Martin Collins, joint coordinator of Paddy Point. Martin and Thomas. Martin first, how are you?
Grand, not about it, Bernie. How are you?
Not too bad. And Thomas, yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks, Bernie. You know, all the family as well, and you know, all the staff and all the councillors. So far, so good. You know, so yeah, we're doing okay.
That's good. That's good. We're also trying to practice social digital distancing. So if you can go about 3 inches back from your computer.
Who, me, you're talking, are you?
You know, I'm just joking. Yeah. Okay, there's quite a bit to talk about, and even though people won't be engaging straight off, or even if they don't, it'll be recorded, it'll be shared, and it'll be something that hopefully they find useful. So I'll start with Martin Collins, coming from the traveller organisation perspective, I guess. Martin, can you give us any update on just about anything related to coronavirus, and also maybe what the organisations are working at the moment?
Okay, well, first of all, maybe a little bit of stating the obvious. Quite clearly, it has been recognised and defined as a pandemic. It's a global virus. Nobody is immune to it. Nobody is safe. But I think there are certain communities who are certainly more vulnerable to contracting the virus. For example, Roma and travellers are particularly vulnerable, given the underlying chronic health conditions that most Roma and travellers have. For example, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other ailments. This obviously makes people a lot more prone to contracting the virus. And then, of course, you have many hundreds of traveller families living in overcrowded, cramped conditions on halting sites and indeed on unofficial sites, and many without running water. So even the basic steps to try and avoid contracting the virus are not available for a lot of traveller families. Like, for example, it's recommended that you should wash your hands quite frequently, every single day with soap and water. Now, that's not, an amenity that's readily available to travellers. And then for those who do contract the virus, the option of self-isolating is quite limited because, you have many individuals, families living in a 2-bedroom trailer in a very confined space. So we have, all of the travel groups have raised this with the government and with the HSE to put in special measures on halting sites and other amenities that would help people to avoid the contracting the virus, or if they do contract the virus, they would have a space, maybe a few spare trailers or a few spare pods on the site where people can isolate for a period of time. So look, it's a serious issue. It's obviously a life and death issue. I do know a number of travellers who have contracted the virus so far. In fact, I was only at a funeral yesterday where a 46-year-old Roma man actually passed away with the coronavirus. Now, he did have underlying conditions, but nonetheless very, very sad. That funeral, he was a father of 8 children, 4 of them under 18 years of age. So look at people need to, insofar as they can, people need to heed the warnings from the HSE and the government. People need to keep their social distance, physical distance, call it what you will. It means 2 meters, essentially that's 6 foot apart. And people need to obey that. If they take these steps, they certainly would minimize the chances of contracting the disease. And the last point I would make, Bernie, and it's really important, large gatherings, weddings and christenings and confirmations, people have to look seriously at these events and whether or not they should proceed. My own son was getting married at the end of April, and we decided to put it back until the end of July and see how things pan out. And I think that's something that a lot of travellers will have to give serious consideration to. Now, funerals obviously are unavoidable, but when you're attending funerals, it's really important that people respect the 2 meter rule. In other words, the 6 feet apart. Yeah.
Thomas, I suppose yourself, would you share that? Would you sense what Martin is coming from? Would you agree?
Absolutely. And again, kind of what Martin was saying there about all the organisations, I think they're really, kind of the organisations, it's great to see the amount of cooperation and people pulling together, both the national and the local organisations are really kind of pushing it out. And for instance, I know that there was a meeting yesterday of the national organisations, and one of the things that came out of it, and indeed Paddy Point was initiating it, was that travellers be named as as a group, as one of the groups, as one of the
Urgency.
Yeah, that, you know, kind of so that it doesn't, that people aren't waiting so long for tests, you know. So I think that's a really important point to make, that all the organisations and at the local level, like the National Traveller Mental Health Network had a meeting, and the amount of stuff that's going on locally as well, whether it's in Kerry or Donegal, the Midlands, you know, right across the board, both in terms of practical stuff on the ground and then in terms of support around mental health. You know, but this is a very challenging time. Mental health is challenging even when things were okay, like before this virus came. So this has really kind of added to that stress and anxiety that was there, and all the problems that was there. This is another layer that pushes that on, and the isolation, social isolation, you know, can add to that, particularly where people have to self-isolate, or where they do get the virus and then people can't go near them, you know, and that's very difficult for travellers, I think, especially, you know.
You might be a bit close to the microphone there, Martin, or else you fell asleep. It sounds just like snoring.
No. I'm paying attention very closely to what Thomas is saying, and I totally concur with everything he has said.
Yeah, oh no, just when the yoke flicks, it's because the sound was made. I'm just letting you know, just in case something up against.
Fair enough.
Thomas, just on the mental health, absolutely. And Martin, both of you, the three of us know we come from a community that's been bombarded for the last century, torn to pieces when it's come to mental health, isolation, exclusion, depression, high levels of suicide, the anxieties, all of these combined with this virus. That cannot be good outcome for people that are going through challenging times as it is.
I know, but I think we have to also look at how we have been at this particular time. I think is to be mindful. Like, we've gone from a situation where people are running around doing things to nearly standing still, that you're not going anywhere, that people are, you know, standing still nearly. And I think in that we need to we need to plan our how we're going to manage our day. And there's a lot of things we can do, I think. I was thinking about this today before I came on, Bernie. And I was thinking, look, the weather is not so bad, you know. Like a family, if you have transport, for instance, there's nothing stopping a family from organising a picnic somewhere. I mean, I know that sounds a bit outlandish, but like putting the children in the van or the car and going off somewhere where there's not loads of people. Going off somewhere nice and spending an afternoon. I think that kind of thing, you know, helps people to kind of reconnect and look at what they can do. Going for a walk, like, I mean, it doesn't take a lot to go for a walk, and people get out for a walk every day, you know.
I definitely think there's a lot to be talked about there, Thomas, because there's a lot of things that we'll be talking about now in terms of around conflict, around feuding. We mentioned about wedding. All of that has to be brought into discussion.
But Bernie, the one thing I would say is that, like, we do have the capacity, to do something always about our circumstances. We have the capacity and the wherewithal, and we always had as travellers. I mean, travellers has always kind of managed. I know at different times there's been different challenges that came, but we have the capacity, I believe, to actually to do something about our circumstances, you know, until we get through this. And we have to change how we do things, coming together in large numbers, shaking hands, for instance. It's very hard for a traveller not to shake a hand when somebody comes. It's like it's nearly automatic. Your hand is out before you think about it. So I think we just have to change how, like Martin was saying, at funerals, it's very hard not to go up to people, you know. And I think we have to just, during this time, we have to just remember to change how we do things. That won't be always the way. We can go back to the way we were when we get through this, but we need to get through this.
I think, Martin, Chris McDonough actually does some training in this, and Thomas, around traveller conflict. So hopefully we'll get him on during the week or next week, and we can talk a bit more about that. Bringing again back to the sites, I suppose the HSE and the travel organisations. Spring Lane at the moment. Has there any issues been raised about that, or any concerns?
Well, just to say, just to pick up on the point that Thomas made, and he's absolutely right. The criteria in terms of who gets prioritised for testing has changed. There's a new rules, if you like, which are being introduced today, and essentially what it means is that you need to show 2 of the 3 symptoms, and if you do, you get certain groups get priority. And Thomas is absolutely right. Travers and Roma have been identified now as a priority group, and so if you demonstrate 2 of the 3 symptoms, so in other words, a high fever or a cough or breathing problems, if you have the symptoms of 2 of the 3, you're deemed to be a priority. And a list has been issued by the HSE and the Department of Health, I think only today, and Travers and Roma are named as high risk groups that need to get priority. And I think that's a credit, in fact, to the collective effort, as Thomas said, of the traveller organisations working really well together in the interest of the community and protecting the community and minimising the spread of this serious deadly disease among our people. Then the other important development is, I only heard this about 2-3 hours ago. Last week, Owen Murphy, Minister for Housing, issued a statement which actually came into law today, I think it is, that anybody in a mortgage arrears or rent arrears, there would be a ban on evictions for 3 months. It was quite clear that wasn't being that would not be applied to Travers. So the collective effort again of the travel groups lobbied the government, and Minister Damien English is going to issue a circular to every single local authority in the country again, either this evening or tomorrow, saying that this ban on evictions includes Travers. And I think that's really important as well. And again, I think that's a tribute to the collective effort of all of the travel groups. And then in the Midlands, you have, they set up a national hotline for travellers who are worried or apprehensive. And I'd like to give out that number. It's 083 100 6300, and this is a dedicated hotline specifically for travellers who are worried or apprehensive or might be shown symptoms of the virus. They can ring that hotline and they will get advice and they will be referred to the appropriate services. And then of course there's many other local travel groups across the country and local primary healthcare projects, which will be a fabulous resource in those communities to engage with travellers and offer them advice and reassurance. The circular that was issued last week by Damien English to local authorities to get them to take certain measures to make sure there's adequate toilets and sanitation on traverse sites, to make sure there's running water. That has to be pressed home by all of us, both the national groups and the local groups, and that obviously applies. You mentioned there yourself Spring Lane, which is absolutely a despicable site. I was on it a few times, and for any human being to be left to live in those conditions for any length of time is just totally inhumane and inexcusable. So there are certain developments taking place to try and support and protect travellers at this time. But there is also an issue of personal responsibility, where personal responsibility can be exercised. So for travellers who do have access to water, it's important they wash their hands a number of times a day. You know, it's important that they don't shake hands with people. It's important, you know, that they keep their social distance. Like there are some steps, you know, where we're in a position to do ourselves. And it's important that we do exercise responsibility because, one, it's in your own interest, of course. It's in the interest of your family and it's in the interest of your community.
Yeah, that's a lot of useful information, Martin, and the number. I think one of the problems we might have is the worst case scenarios because Ireland has one of the worst health systems for coping with ICU patients. It's one of the lowest in Europe. And we haven't seen the worst of this yet. I mean, we are preparing for the worst of it. And that's in terms of people going to the hospitals, going to the doctors, overwhelming the system. Has any organisation, including Paddy Point, some emergency measures put in place for worst case scenarios?
Well, look at it. It's really, I mean, the ultimate responsibility here for dealing with the crisis is the government, the HSE and the Department of Health and the National Emergency Team, which has been established, I think, 2 weeks ago. So that's where the ultimate responsibility lies. But of course, groups like, you know, travellers and traveller organisations are offering advice and support and bringing the experience of travellers on the ground up to that level to inform the policymakers and the decision makers and the healthcare experts what our needs are, what our challenges are and how those needs and challenges can be best addressed. And that's exactly what the national travel groups have been doing. And to be fair, many of the local groups are also playing their part in trying to ensure travellers get the necessary support and protection that's badly needed. But you're absolutely right. There's going to be a surge in the next couple of weeks, and I have heard on the media today that international experts are saying that our healthcare system is going to be overwhelmed. But I think it's also, and not that it's any consolation, mind you, but I think it's the same in many other countries as well. It's not just Ireland, and that's a challenge for the government. And as far as I understand, the strategy is try and slow down insofar as they can the number of cases, so there's not, if you like, an avalanche of people needing hospital treatment. And people must remember, at the end of the day, the statistics tells us that 80% of those who contract the virus will develop mild to moderate symptoms, and 14% then will be regarded as severe, and then the other 6% will be critical and will need hospitalization.
That's quite a lot of people. I go to you, Thomas. 6%. If you were talking about 1 million people, you're talking about 60,000 people.
Yeah, but just to say that, look, it's likely that some people will be hospitalised. Some travellers will be hospitalised. I mean, hopefully not too many, but hopefully it's likely that people on site and in group housing, because we haven't seen the worst of it yet. And, it's likely that some are going to get sick and possibly some hospitalized. Hopefully we can limit that. The actions that we take now, and what you're saying about the traveller organisations, Martin is right. Really, in terms of when people get sick, really you need proper units for people to be treated in, and you have to have the staff to treat people as well if they need hospitalisation. I think the actions that we take now will determine the level of that sickness that the community get is by our actions. So we have to take the action now to make sure that we limit that as much as possible.
Do you think there's something there in terms of how the government has treated travellers for the last 60 years, since 1963, in appalling conditions? And it's quite evident, right up to Carrick Mines. People have been crying out for homes, they've been crying out for this, and we've lobbied. I know a family was 25 years waiting to get a house. That's how long they've been waiting. So my point is, all of a sudden, the government, upper middle class, the ruling classes, are now on level playing field according to the virus. Is it a bit disappointing seeing all these changes come now when they could be made all the time?
Bernie, it's not. Well, essentially, it's actually not a level playing field at all, unfortunately. As I said at the very outset of this interview, there are some groups who are deemed to be high risk of contracting the virus. And travellers and Roma are one of them. Refugees, those in direct provision are others. Prisoners, maybe others. So in that sense,
people,
exactly, and homeless people. So in that sense, there is still a huge level of inequality and exclusion, and thus some are more exposed to this virus than others, and nobody more so than our own community. But you're absolutely right, and I and Thomas and many other travellers have said this over the years. There has been a long history of institutionalized racism, segregation, and human rights violations experienced by our people. And I'll tell you this, it didn't just start in 1963 either. This is going back for centuries, where our people have been forced to live on the margins of society, oppressed, persecuted, cultural identity being denied. We see the manifestations of the racism in the education system, in the unemployment rate, in the health inequalities. These are all the manifestations of the institutionalized racism that our people have and continue to endure.
Thomas, I'll bring that. I'll carry that over, Martin. I'll bring it to Thomas. Start off. Well, everything Martin just said there, and he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
But there's one slight difference. There's a difference in that it is institutionalized racism, but the institutions and the political system and the education system and the legal system and their landlord systems are all colonial systems. So,
but even
would
Bernie,
participating in the same system not be reverse and have more damage on you rather than disengaging?
well, I mean, I don't know what else. I mean, in terms of kind of, improving the situation of travelers, is trying to kind of, make sure that the policies are that's put in place and implemented, and that's what we really suffer with, the lack of implementation. Like a lot of people have been working very hard, including Martin and many others, and travel organisations across the board for decades, and have kind of voiced the community's concerns and needs and that. And it's the lack of implementation that has led to the situation. I mean, if the policies that we had fought for years was implemented, we'd be in a different position now. We wouldn't be in the same position. And so it's the lack of implementation. And I think like that, and you're right, like it is institutional, and Martin is right. It's gone on for a very long time and has gone on much longer than the 1960s. The 1960s really was the first time there was a whole of government approach in terms of putting that into a policy document and saying this is the way we're going to deal with travelers.
But it actually started in the 1500s, and the first institution started with Trinity College, started with Maynooth College, started with the Queen's Colleges. From there they created capitalism, there they created a settled mentality. And that's a bit of an odd one, because settled people can't get their head around that in terms of that we're speaking. Sorry?
Yeah, but there's one thing I would say, sorry for interrupting, Bernie, but there's one thing I would say, and it's really important to remember this, because I think it'd be a great source of encouragement for our people. Everything that's been said in the last 5 minutes by you and by Thomas and myself, like that long history of exclusion and racism, the point is we have survived as a people. We have proven to be very resilient. We've went through a lot, but we're still here. We still exist as a community. I know there's still many issues that need to be addressed and all the rest of it. But the point I'm making is we have survived a lot throughout history.
When you look at it, when you look at Thomas, when you look at it statistically, through the statistics of the last 20, 30 years, you will actually see that everything in our community, all the statistics are actually getting worse. Mental health has gotten worse. Suicides have gone up. So whatever we're doing, thinking it's correct and right, maybe it needs some tweaking, because I think we're trying to fit it into a mentality that is not ours.
Yeah, but I think, Bernie, when you look at that on a global, I mean, if you only look at travelers in isolation, you see that picture. But when you look at that globally, you see particularly, like, I mean, from the 1990s, you see a particular ideology that kicked in. It's called neoliberalism. Yeah, I don't want to kind of, I don't want to kind of.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's good to have this talk.
It's a particular form of capitalism that kicked in with. You had Margaret Thatcher, you had Reagan, and you had Pinochet, and they had this kind of thing called neoliberalism, and all the policies that came thereafter, and is market orientated policies, very much market orientated.
But if you wind that back a small bit, and you take liberalism, then you could fit that into sort of feudalism.
No, I don't want to get into too much politics here because.
No, I won't. But I think it'd be important in terms of understanding mentalities.
Yeah.
Well, when we look at Irish travellers, and we look at say African Americans, and then we look at the Indigenous people of Australia, and we see these groups went through almost identical institutional abuses.
Yeah.
So the common denominator that we all have is one mentality. Because they're English-speaking countries.
But Bernie, the point I was making is that it has got worse for a whole lot of groups. That the gap has got bigger for a whole lot of groups in the last 30 years. Yeah. If you look at it, if you look at the wealth and poverty, if you look at racism, if you look at the whole kind of right-wing kind of increase across Europe and indeed internationally. In the last 30 years, that has got worse. So it has got worse for a whole range of people, a whole range of groups, Roma, travellers, and many other groups. So
that particular mentality, Thomas, when it was designed in Trinity College, was for the upper middle class. It was, it was a particular language. It was a coding.
Yeah.
And then there was other levels of that language given, and you break it down to private schools, down to public schools, who got this mentality. So the mentality we're speaking about global is the one mentality. It started in Ireland, actually. And travellers were one of the very first people to fight that colonialist war. So, we go off for a history lesson all day. Come here, I'm going to ask you another question here.
Right, okay. but it is important to say that, look, you know,
can I just make one? Sorry, one of the consequences of the neoliberalism approach has been individualism, consumerism, and commodification of basic essential human rights services such as housing, sites, healthcare, education. That has been the consequences of that ideology of neoliberalism, that individual and consumerism, and it smacks in the face of collectivity and solidarity. That has been the implications of that approach.
And collective human rights. Because people talk about the institutions talk about human rights, but what they're talking about is individual human rights. You know, whereas groups is a different story. And I think that it's very individualistic, as Martin said. It's market driven. You know, it's about profit, and really, you know, and the market dictates. You'd often hear them saying the market will make things right or balance things out.
But if you were to take neoliberalism, right, and put capitalism, right, put it there in your hand and take a step back, well, you would see that goes into imperialism. And then when you take a step back from imperialism, you see it came from colonialism. So colonialism, say the English colonialism.
Bernie, just, we don't want to lose people here. We want to kind of make sure that, you know, we don't want to lose. I mean, we can have this conversation, and I think it's a very important conversation. But I think we need to keep on track, and we need to make sure that people are staying. I
suppose where I'm coming from all of this is to say that all the mentalities, all the politics belong to a different mentality. It's not a traveller. It's not an Irish traveller mentality.
But Bernie,
system. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I would agree up to a point. It's not terribly surprising, in fact. You know, call it colonial, call it majority. The thing is, majorities have always designed and structured society in a way that reflects their worldview and their set of beliefs and values. And that's no different here in terms of Irish settled people being the majority population, being the ones in power, being the ones in control, get to decide the structures, the policies and the legislation. It's not surprising they're going to design a system, a society that reflects their worldview and their values and ignores minorities such as travellers.
I think, before we go on to this question, but I think you'll find more times than often, you'll find it's actually a minority controlling the majority, which is the 1% ruling classes. Anyway, quick question here, Thomas. There's a challenge going around, right? It's called the coronavirus challenge. You've heard of it, have you?
I've heard of it,
It's about this kind of recorded on social media where they would cough on somebody, run away or spit.
I think Bernie, I think it's ridiculous. I think to have any kind of a challenge like that, I think people are, you know, really, it's even now people is getting arrested for it. And I would really ask people.
I'm not trying to scare people, but is that almost a form of attempted manslaughter?
That's stupid.
To a vulnerable person, to a vulnerable human being.
No, but it's a childish thing. It's a stupid thing to do. It's like, you know, kind of do the, you know, really anyone who has any bit of sense at all will ask people to not do that. And probably young people as well. I'm not targeting young people, but I'm more than likely it's, you know, young teenagers more than likely that will participate in something like that. The thing is to make sure to tell them that, look, that's stupid. It's a stupid thing to do, and it could make somebody sick, and it could end somebody's life. Really, this is a serious issue that we're dealing with, and we need to take it serious. And it's only when it gets closer and closer that we see that. So I would really encourage people not to participate in any stuff like that, you know?
No,
And Bernie, can I just make one more point, please, if you don't mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think the priority obviously is protecting travellers in Roma and minimising the health risks for both travellers and Roma. And please God, we'll get through this, and I'm convinced we will. But when we do get to the other end, as it were, I think there's going to be another challenge. And that challenge is a financial one, because the economy is going to take a massive, massive hit. It's expected that our unemployment rate will rise to something like 18%. It's also known now that it's something like 7.7 million is now being pumped into emergency services and also subsidizing people's wages, those who have lost their jobs, and that's only over the next 3 months, almost 8 billion. Now, that's going to have to be paid for at some stage, and I did hear economists today on the news talking about it. So the economy has taken and will take a huge hit. That all of this is going to have to be paid for. And my concern is when it comes to the stage where there's going to be a recession and everything else, I think travellers and other vulnerable groups are going to be the hardest hit one more time. Because if you think back in 2008 with the recession, the group that experienced the most disproportionate cuts were actually travellers, traveller organisations and traveller services such as education, health and accommodation. And my concern is that when we come through this, and I'm convinced we will come through it, there's going to be another challenge here, and that is to protect and maintain the programmes and the services for travellers and Roma.
Mark, can I ask you just on that?
On the economy, if you take it, Jordan, 2008 with the downturn, Martin, yeah, the economy kind of was down by about 7%, by about 4%, yeah. It kind of the indicator was that it was down by about 4%. Jordan, this coronavirus, they're saying at this stage it'll be down by 7%. So
that's correct.
The economic impact of this is going to be much steeper and take much longer to come out of. So we're going to have a huge challenge, as Martin says, as we go through this.
Sorry about that. Martin, had any of the political leaders from any of the political parties have contacted Paddy Point?
Well, believe it or not, we were contacted by the most senior civil servant in justice only this evening, in fact, around 4 o'clock. Now, there has been some other contacts with other politicians in various government departments, but today we were contacted by Justice. The Taoiseach's department got in touch with Justice, asking was there any information and do we know the numbers of travellers in Roma who might have contracted the virus, and do we know the numbers of those who might have died as a result. So that information has been given back to the Taoiseach's office. Now, that only occurred this evening around 4:30, Bernie. So that's at the highest level, obviously, which is great to see, at the Taoiseach's office, showing some consideration for travellers in Roma. But other than that, the travel groups have been in contact with various government departments and politicians of all different political persuasions.
Very good. Thomas, unless you want to add something to that.
No, I think sorry, go on, Bernie.
The situation also is a bit of one that we'll always need talking about and dealing with is conflict within our own community. Now, again, I can go through all the history. We can go through about the colonialism and the oppression and all of that, and how environments change mentalities change human behaviors, and so on and so forth. But I think in some way now, if there was ever a time to not shake hands.
Don't shake hands.
If there was ever a time to make peace, to find peace, some agreement is now. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think, and I think the Traveller Mediation Service, and you might have Chris or some of the other people who's working in the Traveller Mediation Service on at some stage to talk about it, because there is a number of conflicts, among different families around the country. And like now is the time to kind of to step back from that, and to, really this is a very serious situation that we're in, and and I think people are kind of smart enough. People are smart enough to say, well, look, let's put that on hold. Let's put the energy into kind of making sure that we get through this all right. Get our families through this, get our community through this. And then we can kind of sit down and look at the conflict and hopefully find constructive ways of dealing with it.
Very good. Come here, I'm not going to try to pin you as the alarmist, but you're one of the first people I know to kick the alarm off within the circles. So with that, with the travel organisations and the state agencies, is there any guarantee? Is there more that you feel the organisations could be doing in terms? I've mentioned to Martin, and I'm sure he'll talk about it in a moment, about even setting Paddy Point up as a quarantine, semi-hospital, waiting centre.
I don't think that's practical, Bernie, to be quite honest with you. And in fairness to Paddy Point and to the other travel organisations, I think they really stepped up to the plate. I mean, I think there was people doing things in the background. So there was when kind of earlier on, but I think really we're very lucky to have the traveller infrastructure that we have, including Trav TV. because we're very lucky that we have them things in place, that we have the local traveller organisations in place, that we have the national traveller organisations, and we have some great people as well, across the board. And I think we're very lucky to have that resource here and now, that we can pull that together and say, look, what can we do collectively to minimise this thing and to bring the community through this as best we can. And I think, I think all the traveller organisations, but I don't think it's practical for Harvey Point or anyone else to set themselves up as a hospital or as a quarantine centre. I think really, in terms of getting people tested as quickly as possible, and in terms of the HSE having contingency plans to make sure.
Thomas, just on that, and again, I suppose it's not necessarily a fear, but the worst case scenarios in situations like this. And when you compare it to our health system and the numbers and the overcrowding and the swelling of it, worst case.
Can I just intervene there? Can I just intervene? My understanding is obviously tourists are not arriving in the country for obvious reasons, and there's a lot of capacity in our hotels. And in fact, I do understand today that there has been 350 hotel rooms made available for people who need self-isolation. And I think a lot more capacity exists, which should be availed of. And in terms of self-isolation, I was speaking to some other people today. That's another option that Travellers and Roma and travel organisations should be looking to, and I'm sure they will, for Travellers and Roma to be able to avail of these hotel rooms. And I think over the next while, as we reach the climax or the surge of this virus, I think I've no doubt a lot more hotel capacity will be made available. And I think it's important, and I've no doubt we will, the travel organisations will be looking to that, will be getting the information out to travellers on the ground, that this, if it's not an option to self-isolate on a site, this is an option. All this spare capacity, these rooms in hotels, which are not being used because tourists are obviously not arriving in the country.
Thomas, what would you say to travellers that are watching that may have several people who have anxiety, people who are worried, people who are chain smokers and they're concerned, and then they're watching all this bullshit on social media that's messing with people's minds? Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I just want to say one thing about the isolation and that, and what Martin was saying about the hotels.
Right.
I think, and you mentioned Trinity College actually earlier on. Trinity is making a lot of their rooms that normally students that would be living in that's gone home, and they have a Department of Nursing, and they're going to make them, and likewise other universities, for a lot of students that's gone home will become available over the next. So hopefully the capacity will be there for people as well, and I think that's a good thing. In terms of, you're right about there's two things about the messaging. One is getting reliable information, not taking things, what people say, someone tell me this or someone tell me that, or I heard this or I heard that. That can lead to more stress and more panic. So it can. So getting reliable information, going to reliable websites, whether that's national travel organisations and some of the stuff that they are putting up is from both the HSE website or from government websites, and that's the best place to get the information. The second thing I'd say about the anxiety, Bernie, is that we can get overloaded with the messages, that we can be looking at the internet all the time, listening to the radio, and that kind of keeps us in a heightened state of stress, We need to kind of limit that, listen to the radio, maybe the news in the morning, or have a look at something, switch it off. You're not going to miss anything because it'll be on the next news bulletin at 1 o'clock or at 6 o'clock in the evening. So twice or three times a day is enough to get the information you need. We can really kind of, because it'll only make us more stressed and more tense, so that's, but you're right, there is a lot of stress at this particular time. People can do things about that, like taking time out. It can be 10 or 15 minutes, just taking time out. You can go into your bedroom and you can sit down and you can just relax and switch off for 10 or 15 minutes. It doesn't take a huge amount of effort to do that. And you just kind of let go of everything for that bit of time for yourself, and just breathe and just focus on your breath for 10 or 15 minutes, and then come back. I'll send out stuff on the website. We're going to do a video on the National Travel and Mental Health website. So we are, and we're going
to come back to you in a minute, Thomas. I'll come back to that in a minute. I want you to talk a bit about that in a moment. But Martin, back to you for a moment, and pretty much in the same area of mentality and psychological concerns. There are a situation now where people are isolated. There are people that will be in a house with one or more abusers. This must be terrifying. This is probably more terrifying than the coronavirus for some people. Would you have any advice or any contact numbers for support over domestic violence issues, I suppose?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, we in Pappy Point have also issued a resource, we're about to issue a resource tomorrow, an online resource for women who find themselves in very vulnerable situations because people are confined and might be experiencing domestic violence or tension or so forth. So that resource will be offering advice, referral and phone numbers of different agencies that can be contacted if women are feeling, there's potential for physical abuse and for harm. And I think everybody's very cognizant of that issue, because obviously if you have people confined to the home who are seeing a lot of each other over a long period of time, obviously tension can begin to develop, and unfortunately that can manifest itself in violence towards women. So it is an issue. It is something we're very cognizant of, and certainly travel women and others will need a lot of support from the different agencies and organisations, refuges and so forth, and from the guards. And I also understand that the district courts, despite the context we're in, they are sitting and are still issuing protection orders and barring orders. And I think it's important for women to remember that, that the judicial system hasn't completely collapsed or closed down, that, the family courts are sitting and barring orders and protection orders are being issued. And that's obviously really important and can be great.
There is a helpline. There's a 24-hour helpline. Women's Aid has a 24-hour helpline for people who are experiencing domestic abuse, and it can now it's harder. There was an interview this morning, I think, by Women's Aid, and it can be much more difficult for people who's experienced domestic abuse to contact somebody when they're in the house with somebody who is abusing them, or because it can make things much more difficult for them. So it is a very difficult time for a lot of people. Likewise, people who has alcohol addiction, there's a lot of home drinking because the pubs are closed. People won't be going out. So this can be a very difficult time. And like the children would normally be at school. So it can be a very difficult time for some families, and we need to be kind of, be mindful of that and provide as much support as we can to families, particularly them families that's in particular difficulties.
Thomas, with that, you might tell us just a bit about your services, how people might be able to get in contact either with yourself, and tell me also, aren't you planning and hoping to do online courses on mental health?
Yeah, well,
if you are, you might tell us about that.
Yeah, well, one thing is that the current clients that we have at the minute, the clients that we have is continuing to have counselling by phone at the minute. Yeah, we're hoping by the end of next week to have counselling online, and that's for the present clients that we have, but also clients who want to come in now because we can't see people face to face. So people will be able to now people can contact us for support and advice at the minute. And we will be looking at other means, but hopefully the end of next week we'll have a counselling online that people will be able to link into.
This is your number here, Thomas, is it?
Yeah, that's the number, the mobile number, and if people want to link in with us, that's that's on most of the time. Give us a ring, and if we can offer any advice.
The landline number is 018685761.
That's it, yeah.
And the mobile number is 086-308-1476.
That's it.
Martin, I'm going to ask you a quick question. Have you any advice to any of the travellers that might be on YouTube doing call-outs? Would you recommend they postpone their flights for at least 3 to 6 months?
I say they shouldn't fight at all.
Oh, don't say that, Martin. You don't know what caused it. Come on.
They need a cop onto themselves. I and others, including Thomas and many others, have been very clear about this and very consistent for many, many, many years. And I remain consistent. It's absolutely appalling. It's unacceptable. Yeah. It's medieval. It's primitive. This sort of behaviour. And this is harming not just the individuals directly involved in bare knuckle. It's harming their families. It's harming the community. It has created nothing but havoc, pain in our community. Children have been uprooted from their homes. Children have been taken out of school. Homes have been vandalized. Vehicles have been vandalized. People have been injured physically, psychologically. Some people have lost their lives. Others have gone to jail. There are no winners in this.
I think there's a difference there. I think Thomas might agree or disagree. There's a difference between a conflict, culture, and violence. The second part can be attributed to how travellers have been treated.
Bernie, these bare knuckle don't resolve.
Part of travel culture.
They only serve to escalate the issues further. They don't resolve any differences. They don't resolve disagreements. It's a domino effect.
But that mightn't be attributed to that. That could be attributed to the use of drugs, alcohol, unemployment.
Bernie, whatever the reasons, and whatever the dynamics, I think there's an onus and a responsibility on all the traveller leaders and traveller activists to do what we can.
Yeah.
Try and de-escalate the situation and bring peace to the community.
Yeah. And just add to that, Bernie. I think, the thing is that violence only begets more violence. Violence doesn't lead to peace.
Yes.
Violence has never led to peace. Violence only begets more violence. And of course, people will be in conflict, but we have to find more constructive ways, whatever the cause is.
I suppose if you were to put it in this context, right, say the way travellers have been treated, we would be in two things. One, in a state of arrested development. In other words, we can't move forward, we can't move back, we can't move at all. The other one would be historical current traumas. In other words, travellers would be traumatized. They don't even know they're traumatized. These reactions, these human behaviours are caused by our thoughts and our mentality. And our mentality has been influenced by the system that we call the settled system, the colonial system. So my point would be, if to unravel that, wouldn't we have to go talking about historical traumas, historical healing? Wouldn't that be the way to go?
Bernie, this is a hugely complex, multifaceted issue, and there's a lot of dynamics involved, interfamily dynamics. I've always said that you can't separate or divorce what's happening to the community from what's happening within the community. I think they're inextricably linked in terms of the oppression, the persecution, cultural denial, high unemployment, poor living conditions. I think this creates the conditions, or certainly creates some of the conditions that whereby conflict, feuding, and violence can occur. So I think it is a strategy. We need to deal with the overall situation in terms of exclusion, racism, and then deal with, and also simultaneously deal with the internal dynamics that give rise to conflict. But look at Bernie. At the end of the day, let's be honest. We know that young traveller boys in particular, 12 and 13 years of age, maybe even younger, are being socialised, are being conditioned by their parents. Into having to honor the family name, defend the family name. And if you do anything
I think what you're saying, and look, I'm not disagreeing with you.
We have to deconstruct that internalized ideology that, honor the family.
I think internalized ideology comes from the outside, because that's how settled people would see it.
I'm agreeing with you. I think that's part of it. I think absolutely. I would agree with that. But what I'm saying here is that there's also issues within the community whereby we can take some steps, we can take some initiatives to try and de-escalate conflict, to make sure people are safe, people are not being attacked, their homes are not being burned, people are not being killed or injured, children are not being uprooted from school. We have a responsibility as travel leaders, as travel activists and travel organizations to do all we can to try and reduce or minimize the conflict and the violence that's actually killing our community.
And just add to that, Bernie, just to say one thing, is that no good has ever come from that kind of conflict. No, if you look at the benefits, what has been the benefits? There has been no benefits, and you're right, like it is, and Martin's right, this is connected to the external oppression that we internalize, and it's called horizontal violence, that we take it out on our own as well, that anger, that aggression, and we see that, and many people have written that. But the thing is that we have the capacity to change that. And sometimes it takes a lot more courage to actually step away from something than to kind of step forward into it.
But this is the thing about being traumatized, I suppose, in one way, is if you don't know of the traumas that were inflicted upon you. In other words, if you don't know your history, if you don't know your culture, you don't know what happened to you, that violence manifests in a way that, you know, it has no link. Other words, internalized. So I think with Meg's case, he made a point here. I think it's referring back to the crisis, the other crisis that's going to follow this crisis, and that's the economy. We should not accept to wait and see how they plan to get money back for all of this. We should be joining now with other oppressed people and tell them that we will not be paying for this time around. Let the rich and the privileged pay for this time. It's their turn. Right. I think it's the cuts to the NGOs she's referring to.
No, I think Mags is dead right, and I think she's making a point there about that. Like Travellers as Travellers were in this situation, but there's many other groups as well in a similar situation. There's a lot of disadvantaged settled people, homeless people, Roma. There's a whole range of different groups. People being evicted out of their homes. We need to kind of build solidarity with them groups and stand together with them and say, listen, collectively, we need to make sure that these are the groups that's prioritized. Travellers, but all the other groups as well. And the more collective voice we have, the stronger we are. But
can I just run this by the two of you, right? If you think about it like this in terms of history, see with the Irish travellers and settled people. Now we know the ridiculing we get. I'll give you an example. They'll say to you, "Who are you? Where did you come from? Your culture is primitive. You came from India. You came from Turkey." Now we know genetically, historically, the travellers can go back 1,000 plus years, which means that we would be the people on this island. So the question is, why are there two people on the same island with the same surnames, but have two different cultures, two different mentalities?
Well, I'll tell you, one thing about that, Bernie, I was listening to a lecture in Trinity College one day, a woman who works down the Rotunda Hospital, and she's from Nigeria. She's a nurse, and she was talking about, she was doing a study on mortality in first-time mothers, And during her lecture, she said 350 ethnic groups in Nigeria, all Nigerian, all black, all living, you know. And I said, excuse me, I said, how many groups? She said 350, 350 different ethnic groups. Some of them speak different languages. Some of them didn't have any language. Their language had been eroded. So like this idea that you can only have one ethnic group, you know, as a part of a kind of a national, because nationality has nothing to do with it.
I think even the word ethnic group was put on us, right? Because we're not necessarily an ethnic group. Because ethnic under its legal definition means the people without a land. But our history tells us that this came from a professor of law. I must get him. But this is we know from our history that we would be connected with the lands, castles, territory.
Bernie, can I just kind of clarify my understanding of ethnicity? Ethnicity replaced
ethnic. When you say ethnic groups, ethnic minorities.
Ethnicity, the term ethnicity replaced this idea of race. Race is a fixed biological kind of thing. Ethnicity kind of acknowledges that the culture and history and kind of a people, and that changes. That changes. That's socially constructed, and that changes. Whereas race is biological and set. So ethnicity kind of acknowledges people, and we're all from an ethnic group. Everyone's from an ethnic group. We just happen to be a minority group rather than the majority. So ethnicity wasn't put on. Ethnicity is kind of replaced this term of race, which is more biologically set.
Martin, where do you think in terms of, say, why we have settled and travellers with the same surname, say Michael Collins, Martin Collins, B.B. Sweeney, the actor, myself maybe. Why is there same people, same complexion with different mentalities, different cultures?
Well, first of all, just to go back to the earlier conversation about race vis-a-vis ethnicity. In fact, the United Nations CERN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination issued a general recommendation a couple of years ago saying that race is a completely discredited concept, that there's only one race, and it's the human race. And in fact, race and racism was a political social construct that was introduced in the 12th and 13th century, a major period of colonization, and it was used to justify the genocide and the persecution of indigenous peoples right across the world, in the Americas and in Africa and other places. So just to say that,
in Ireland, believe it or not.
Yeah, so Thomas is right. The term that's in currency in the last number of years is ethnic minority or minority ethnic groups, which talks about an identity having a culture, a history, a language, and other customs and rituals.
These would be sort of the organisation, European World Organization's definitions, recommendation. I'm asking anyone, for that matter. Can anyone explain to me why there is travellers and settled people on the same island? Where did settled people come from? If we have to keep telling them where we came from,
I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows. I mean, look at history. History is always contested. Okay, you have 2 historians, 3 historians. It's like economists.
It's different. It's different. I'll tell you why, my friend.
No. But let me finish.
That's what it used to be. It used to be contested and ambiguous. But now we're talking scientific.
No, Bernie, let me finish.
Scientific.
Well, if you let me finish the point, then we can have a conversation. The point I'm making here is history everywhere across the globe is always contested. There are different perspectives on it, depending on your worldview and whether you belong to the majority population or the oppressed minority population. And I'm not sure if that can be resolved.
Of course it can.
No, Bernie. It'll be contested as we go, because it depends on your standpoint. And even though you're saying about the scientific evidence and all that, like how that's interpreted, scientific evidence has to be interpreted. The facts don't speak for themselves sometimes. They have to be interpreted, and that depends on your standpoint. That depends on your ideology. That depends on a whole lot of things. So it's interpreted. So
what science does tell us, Thomas, science tells us what something is. It'll tell us for facts. All right.
Well, Bernie, it tells us something, but it depends on how that's constructed. And it's not straightforward. I mean, people talk about research here and research there, but actually, how research is constructed, who constructs it, and that and if you see, like, I mean, if you look at somebody once said, and I think this sums it up. I think actually it was Mark Twain, the great philosopher, when he said, the very ink in which history is written is mere fluid prejudice. Yeah,
and I think it's worth remembering that, because who gets to write history? And the point he was making is usually the elite, it's the privileged. And somebody else once says that history is always about the person that owns the mine and never about the person that's down working in the mine. So Thomas is absolutely right. It all depends on who gets to write history and from whose perspective is it being written. And quite often, as we know to our own personal cost, it's minorities who get excluded from history, and Travers is a case in point.
Fair point, and fair enough. I suppose, it's kind of hard to let go in one way, because I'm still. Would you say then that's the case, that if our mentality is different and the settled mentality is different, that we'd be actually the indigenous mentality, given that we've got the oldest culture that has never been broken, and the settled people had the 1600s with the Elizabethan conquest in the Trinity College, and their minds had changed into a settled mentality. Do you think we'd be indigenous then rather than ethnic?
Well, I think well, Bernie, there's no conflict between being indigenous and ethnic. You can be we are indigenous ethnic group. We are, and that's just the way it is.
There's actually two different. They're covered under two different laws.
Yeah, but whether they're covered under different laws or not, there's no conflict. Like, there's no conflict between nationality and ethnicity.
True.
The thing is that if you go back far enough, that most groups would have been nomadic. the first when nomadism really came to an end was when farming first came in. Yeah, people got more attached to the land, and they reckon that was with the Egyptians around 4,000 or 5,000 years ago when they started to farm the land. They got more attached to the land. Prior to that, you had more different types of nomadism, whether that was kind of grazing animals, moving animals, from one place to another, or different types. But you had a lot more nomadism then. And as that went on, as time went on, people did become more attached to the land, and so the land became kind of the key thing, and then people became more sedentarized and that. But I think the first sedentary people in Europe was in France, in a part of France.
My understanding would be, because I have a good friend that has studied or specialized in the 1600s, Dylan Foley. And I think when we're looking back at it, the term nomadism was something that the civilized put on people who were not to be colonized. So civilization came from Roman mentality. The English one came from the Roman one. So what you have here in Ireland was that the travellers and settled got separated by mentality, by culture. In other words, we did practice all of them traits, the semi-nomadism, but there was always part of a system where the warriors, the druids, the poets, there was castles. There was a run around the country or your circuit that lasted for 1 year where you traded, because that was the economy. We didn't have money. I'm saying to you that all the elements of trade and culture have existed with travellers in 2020, where you do not find them in the settled community.
No, there's different groups, and as I said, there'd be different groups of there was different groups of people, throughout history would have dealt with different things, and some of them kind of would have settled. I mean, the cowboy films that you've seen between the ranchers and the cowboys and the planters, I know it's a kind of a joke, but it symbolizes something between people who was grazing animals and the farmers, so it does, and you can see that, and moving cattle around or whatever. But likewise, some people settled and some people didn't, but some people were excluded from that as well, like kept out of them groups, but mentality, I don't know if mentality is the right word, Bernie, because your mentality is part of your culture. You're shaped by your culture, yeah? The norms, the traditions, the values, like not just kind of the things we see. Like culture is like an iceberg. We see a bit of it on top of the water, but the biggest part of it is under the water. The values, the norms, the things that we're talking about earlier on. We're talking about shaking hands, that your hand goes out nearly before you think about it. Just that kind of the family, extended family, the kind of values that we hold on to. That's the stuff that we don't see a lot of the time in culture, but it's the culture that shapes our worldview.
Here's an interesting one. That's why I think mentalities could be important. This includes Martin as well, because when you consider that Dublin was a 1,000-year-old colony that was under the English mentality that has never changed any of its systems since 1922. No change in the political, legal, no system changes. So that means he had to keep the same mentality to operate the same colonial systems and then producing the same outcomes, which we call institutional racism against travellers. It's actually colonial racism against Irish people, because that mentality and system was designed to crush all Indigenous peoples, destroy their cultures, take their land, profit from them, so on and so forth. But that's the difference between the mentalities, I think.
Go on, sorry, Mark, you go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering where we're going with all of this.
I thought we're engaging with three bored traveller people who are self-isolating.
Well, I was invited to speak about the coronavirus and what we can do to support and minimise the risks to our people. But look, it seems we have kind of delved into a historical evolution of travellers, where we came from and how we're influenced by settled people and the majority of the population. And look, I'm just saying we're in the realm of speculation. Some of the stuff, little bits and pieces, we do know, but generally speaking, I think we're in the realm of speculation. We just don't know because there's no historical records concerning our people for the reasons.
This is what I'm trying to tell you for the last number of years is that there's tons of it.
No, there's not tons of it.
The fact that it's worrying in one way, because if we have people that are senior in our organization telling us that it's very vague, that there's nothing really back there, we couldn't find anything, which is completely untrue.
Well,
But the mistake we all made was, when we look back into history, we were looking for travelers. So what you should have been looking for was, where is the settled people? Because you will not find the settled people 15, 14, 13. You'll find a different kind of settlers. But you will find mentality.
I thought you were chairing this discussion. Bernie, I thought you were chairing this discussion. If you let me finish the point, right? And the point is, and the reality is, despite what you say or what Dylan Foley says or what any other anthropologist or sociologist says, the point is, and Robbie McFay is actually quite clear about this, a very esteemed sociologist.
Who's Robbie McFay?
He's a sociologist
that's written a lot of stuff on travelers.
Who was actually very instrumental in making the case.
Not an historian, no?
No, sociologist.
So we're going to disrespect the historian for somebody else.
The point is, and the fact is, and it's very unfortunate and sad, but it is true, we as a community have been completely written out and are invisible when it comes to Irish history. And the reason for that is, and this is actually reinforcing your point, Bernie, if you care to listen to it, history has been written by the majority population, the elite, the ones with the power, and they get to write it from their perspective. Thus, travellers are excluded. We do get little sporadic references here and there, all right, but nothing substantially. And the only historical record we have as a people is passed on orally, down through the generations, you know. And I do think it's time that whatever little bit of historical reference we have here and there, that it would be documented and put into one a publication. But I think that's a task.
Now I'm going to tell you why we're talking about this. And just briefly on that, my ancestors actually had paid to have the Book of Ballymote written, which was in the 1400s. But we'll move on from that, all right? Thomas, and I know the reason I'm saying all of this is because if we understand our history and where we came from, I promise you, it will open up a completely different channel for travellers. We'll see the world differently. We'll reflect on where we came from and the importance. It will minimize conflict because we would have understood our history. It'll understand about the psychological effects that we're having today, that we can't know where they're coming from, but understanding history could alleviate a lot of these stresses. And also, we're one of the most resilient people on the planet when you consider it. 1,250 years we've been at conflict, genocides, famines, diseases, conquests, you name it. And we're still here and we're still fighting. So that's, I suppose, I'm trying to get in there.
I think, Bernie, you know, in terms of, we don't have to go too, the thing is, we don't have to go way back so far. I mean, to look at, you know, the situation of travellers that we're in and what we need to do in terms of to move out of it, and also to understand the oppression. I don't think we have to have that. I think, as Martin said earlier on, and I agree, there'll always be, and even within the traveller community, you're going to have, different views on history. Like, and it'd be very, like, I mean, even here as we sit down, you know, and Martin's right, we've gone kind of way back, but we don't have to go back to the 1400s or the 1300s to understand the situation that we're in right now. People know that from their own experience. And when you talk to people's experience, people understand that this is the situation we're in right now. This is the things that's impacting on us, and this is what we need to do about it.
Okay, I tell you what, I'll leave the history there for a while, right? Because I could go on all day about this. Thomas, again, because I suppose people are watching this and I want to hear.
Can I just say, Bernie? I mean, Bernie, just before we move on, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think it is important that our collective memory as a people and our collective experience throughout Irish history, I think it's important that it is recognised and it's recorded and it's documented in some fashion. I really think that's important. But, you know, at the end of the day, the present context is that for many, many travellers out there, history is not relevant or important at this moment in time. If they're looking for a tap, if they're looking for a skip, if they're looking for a trailer, if they're looking for the right to get a hotel for a wedding, if they're looking for the right to healthcare, the right to a job, the right to be travelling.
Well, how about if they knew their history and didn't put it forward?
I don't disagree.
Have it indigenous people's rights, which we would be indigenous. Wouldn't
well,
that?
We are indigenous. We're indigenous to the island of Ireland. That's just a fact. That's not in dispute. We're an indigenous ethnic group, as Thomas said earlier on. And, you know,
we're classed as an ethnic group in Europe and not an indigenous group. Why is that?
Well, we are regarded as an ethnic group and in Ireland since the 1st of March of
No, that's the
2007.
problem. I'm saying they've recognised as an ethnic group.
No, there's no legal
words-
standing, Bernie.
Sorry?
We're recognized, but that has no legal kind of basis. That is the problem here.
Yeah.
I think under the Indigenous people's rights, it is by law. Ethnic is different. I'll give you an example, all right? I'll give you an example.
Bernie, there's many other
Native
groups who are
Americans are an Indigenous people of America, right? They're entitled to their lands by law.
No.
Now,
Yes.
African Americans are an ethnic group and are classed as an ethnic group.
Yeah.
Yes. Bernie, can I just say there for a second?
Yeah, my friend.
Under the UN Indigenous Peoples Conventions, you're absolutely right. For those who are recognised as being Indigenous, whether it's Native Americans or Australian Aborigines or the Maori people in New Zealand, there are certain rights and entitlements. Of course there is. But it doesn't mean that those rights and entitlements are being vindicated. That's the problem in terms of land rights and access to their natural resources, whether it's mining or whatever it might be. You're absolutely correct, but it's not going to be a panacea. It's like in Ireland, there was a very false and a big misunderstanding that once travellers were recognised as an ethnic group, that it was going to be a silver bullet and everything would be resolved. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way. So even in Ireland, I'm not going to spend, I'm going to be quite honest with you now, I'm not going to spend whatever little bit of time I have left on this planet. I'm not going to spend the next 15, 20 or 30 years campaigning for travellers to be recognised as an Indigenous group, just like we did for ethnicity, because I don't think it's going to be a panacea. I don't think it's going to be a silver bullet and resolve all of our issues. In terms of
I think that's something worth coming back to. Come here, I'm going to let both of you finish up, right? Thomas, first of all, again, tell us about your service. Tell us about the upcoming videos you're planning to do on mental health and why it's important, and particularly where can people go to find and watch these videos? Yeah, well, the key thing I would say to people around the country, to who's ever looking at this, is to link in with their local traveller organisation for starters, yeah? So there's to contact that. Most traveller organisations now during this time has numbers that you can contact. Some of them are 24-hour numbers. They're there 7 days a week, some of them. So contact, particularly where people need to be contacted. In terms of ourselves, I think the number is there. It's showing up on your screen there, Bernie, behind you there. So people can contact us. We are going to have counselling online. I think this is. I think the TravVision could be a very good platform for bringing on groups. I think and highlighting issues and bringing people together. So I think this is a good forum. I think the conversation kind of, when we have enough conversations, we mightn't go down too many avenues. We might stick to the one avenue. So, but I think it's a good platform, and I'm delighted to have been on it. So thanks. Well, hopefully Thomas should come on for future talks, and we're hoping to get more guests on. Hopefully Max Casey's going to come back to me. There's a lot going on for a lot of people at the moment. We've also a few people in different parts of the country is going to get involved by giving us regular updates in their localities. And that invitation also goes to yourself, Martin Collins, if you're still there. I think I've lost internet connection. Hello? Have I lost you? Yeah.
I'm here, yes.
Sorry,
sorry. I got cut off there for about 30 seconds.
Yeah, same as. Basically, Thomas, we'll hope we'll have you on again, maybe regular as a panel. We'll have females on, we'll have various other activists, and also people from Direct Provision, people from Settle. It doesn't matter to me. It's important we all talk about these conversations. I think some of the issues, Bernie, that you raised, are very good and would create the conditions for great discussions. I think, and have a few people on, a few of the people that you named, that Martin named, if you're talking about the history, I think them is the discussions, and then people can tune in and watch them. I think them, that would be really beneficial, So I think it's a very good platform for that, I appreciate it. Martin Collins, tell us again, Pappy Pointer on standby, there's contact details, there's numbers to be got, and also just to tap in with local organizations. But also just tell us again, maybe just wrap it up and tell us, send your message out to your people. That's what I should say to you. Well, take your time anyway. Is he gone again? He is. Over a second. No, he's... Over a second, I see. Oh, sugar. Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we got you. We got you.
Back in. Yeah.
Sorry, Bernie. There was a call coming through on my phone. That was the interruption. Look, Paddy Point and other national travel organisations are part of this ongoing collective where we are cooperating in.
Yeah. He's gone. Yeah, you're gone again, Martin.
Yeah, I think he's gone
Gone
again.
again. Yeah.
Are you there, Martin? 1 second now. 1 second. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I think you went off there again for a second.
No, Bernie, I'm sorry. My sister, Bridgie, is trying to get through to me. She tried there on 2 occasions.
Okay, we'll go and speak to your family. Martin, look after yourself, and we hope to have you again, have you back on again soon.
More than that. Look at that. Make sure my fee is posted to me, will you?
I will, yeah. The coronavirus out there. Thomas McCann, thank you very much for your time, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
You're very welcome, Bernie, and take care of yourself. Yeah, and everyone else out there as well. Look after yourselves.
I appreciate it. Bye-bye, lads. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.
See you, Martin. All the best.
Good luck.